Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life. This is episode 67. My name is NBZ. I'm the host here of this damn show. It's my damn show, as Garnet Lee would say. And I'm joined by my damn co-host, and his name is Bally. Bally, how are you doing today?
Hi NBZ. Been playing games that actually came out this year from Nintendo. It's this weird phenomenon.
No backlogs in sight this week, Bally.
Not this week.
No, it's been a bunch of new things, something that you've been getting to a little late, but is definitely good to be hearing from you. And obviously, Fire Emblem Week, of course. So a lot of things to talk about, Bally.
For Europe.
For Europe, yes, of course. So, Bally, why don't you lay out the show for us today and tell people what we're going to be chatting about?
We're going to be talking about some brand new spanking new games we've been playing. We've got some emails, and then for our third segment, seeing as this E3, we know that we're going to get some Zelda NX and Zelda Wii U news and footage, and hopefully a trailer and a reveal, some details. So we're going to go back and watch. We'll talk about the last time Zelda on a home console was demoed at E3, and that was of course 2010 with Skyward Sword. So we're going to talk about that. We've both watched the E3 press conference from 2010 where it was revealed, and we've got a few things to say about it.
Yeah, we also recorded that, so if you want to watch us live reacting to an old press conference, it's a feature on my channel called E3 Rewind. That'll be up on our Twitter feed. So you can go follow us at TNL Podcast, and you should find the link there. If you don't know, all my YouTube stuff. So Bally, before we get into the yesteryear of Zelda, we have some new video games to talk about, and I've been hearing that you've been flying about the Lilac system. So why don't you give us a check-in with the brand new Star Fox game?
So Star Fox Zero, the most controversial game of the year, arguably, so far.
Arguably, yeah. It's been pretty divisive.
Pretty divisive. A lot of people have a lot of bad stuff to say about this game. I've got a couple of bad things to say, but in general, I think this is a pretty sweet game.
So the side of history you fall down on, Bally, is the positive end of Star Fox Zero.
I'm definitely closer to the Greg Leahy, Guillaume side of the argument than the James Jones side from RFN, let's just say. In general, I think presentation-wise, it's a really crisp, clean-looking game. There are better-looking Wii U games, but I think in general the worlds look quite nice and quite
Do you
clean.
think that that's the frame rate kind of doing the job for you, though? Because I find, like, some of the time, if a game doesn't necessarily have the greatest of textures or doesn't look that great, like, in terms of detail, I think that frame rate helps to, like, smooth it over.
I definitely do think frame rate saves parts of that, you're right. And talking of frame rate, I would actually have to admit that when there's a lot of explosions and things going on, and when there's a lot of stuff happening on the screen, sometimes the frame rate can drop.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's never to a degree where I'm like, oh god, what's going on? Like it's always just a bit slower. Like it's something that you would probably find a lot more irritating than I do personally, just because that's how we play games. But I just think it in general does look really nice.
I imagine that's part of the reason why it's not that detailed then, is because they wanted to maintain 60 like most of the time, and even if it is dropping now, like can you imagine if it was this really gorgeous looking game and then it wasn't even running like at a solid 30 and was dropping and then chugging horribly? Like that would have been way worse. And all these people saying, oh, it looks like an N64 game, it looks terrible. I think the fact that it has that clean smoothness to it helps to justify it as looking much better. And I will say, like, when we played this at the Hyper Japan event last year, I was really struck at how good it actually did look in motion, because when we watched it at E3, it wasn't impressing me at all. And you do really have to see it like at 60 on a TV screen.
Definitely. Let's get to the controls. This is the most, this is the part that divides fans the most.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because as much as this game looks like Star Fox 64, it handles nothing like Star Fox 64 almost in any way whatsoever. So this is my theory about why a lot of people have come down pretty hard on these controls. So try and put yourself into a world where every single game you play is using motion controls. Every single game from when we were younger and we'd play games right up till now. I'd say every game, every flying game we played, every shooter we played, we always used motion controls. And then suddenly, imagine a game came along in 2016 and they said, hey, actually, here's some analog sticks. Why don't you try and play a shooter with some analog sticks? I think that the media in general would be like, oh, it feels horrible. Oh god, it feels different. I can't handle it. It doesn't handle well. This is horrible. And I honestly think that's how a lot of people have reacted to this game. It's incredibly different. It's incredibly difficult to get used to. I'm not going to deny that. But I just think that ultimately it's just a different way to play. And I sound like a marketing guru.
Yeah, that's like Nintendo's new slogan almost, you know?
But ultimately, honestly, I think it is difficult to get into, but once you get there and you when you first pick up a game and it's got a new control system, it's always a bit difficult. And I honestly think, like, imagine a world where, like I said, you played motion controls your whole life and then switched to analog sticks. It would be really difficult. And I just think that's the uphill battle this game faces, and that's not to say it's bad.
It's kind of the analogy that you can use with like a lot of PC players. The Co-optional podcast in particular, that's full of, you know, Total Biscuit, Dodger, and all these people who play on PC, and they always talk about going from playing shooters on PC to playing on console, about how they're so incompetent with analog sticks and they find it incredibly difficult. I feel that that's like maybe another analogy that you could use here, is going from the PC to the controller.
And it just feels nothing like, and it feels nothing like anything Nintendo's ever done, really. It feels distinctly different from analog sticks, and on top of that, it feels distinctly different from using like a nunchuck and a Wiimote. It really does feel unique. And I think that this control style benefits I should get onto the camera as well, but I think the control style benefits the free flying areas. I've forgotten, open range mode, that's what it's called, I think.
All range.
Yeah. It benefits those areas a bit more. I think the on rails parts, they're great, but I think that they don't feel quite as different as the all range mode parts. And there's definitely fewer on rails missions in this game, which I actually like, and I think it works well for this game. Camera. The camera in this game is glorious. It's absolutely incredible. Specifically in all range mode, it's very simple. So if you don't know the controls, on the gamepad you're looking from cockpit view, and on the TV screen you're looking at a third person view, but you also have a shooting reticle. The motion control controls the shooting reticle, and your analog sticks control the flight of the R-Wing. But when you're locked on with ZL, the camera lines up the R-Wing with, it's a bit like L targeting, but in flying 3D space. So the camera lines up the R-Wing with the enemy, but the downside is that the shooting reticle vanishes on the top screen. Obviously on the bottom screen nothing changes. So what you end up doing, and I think this is quite fun actually, is you end up lining up, you end up looking at the top screen to line up, then you look at the bottom screen if you want to shoot. But if you don't want to shoot and look at the bottom screen, all you have to do is line up using the top screen and that unique camera angle, release ZL, and the second you release ZL, your shooting reticle comes back and you can start aiming. And I just think it's a really intuitive, unique way to play a space shooter that works incredibly well, and it's so great in dogfights. And no matter how many, great Star Wars games Factor 5 released, the dogfights, like in multiplayer, it's just really difficult to find where your opponent is, and you never know which move to use to try and get your opponent in front of you to shoot them. And this game just makes it so easy.
It was my biggest complaint about Star Fox 64, is in those open or range areas, I'm really bad at trying to slow down and turn and find, you see on the radar all these people floating about, but I'm like, how do I reorient myself? I've got to do the loop-de-loop and flip around, and I can never get a good sense of having them in front of me, aiming at them, and then all of a sudden they're out of my vision again, so I have to do the same thing and slow down and turn. It's just a laborious process, and what you seem to be saying is that they basically eliminated that as an issue, and it's become a much more integral and much more interesting part of Star Fox.
Yeah, and it's great. And it looks incredibly cinematic at the same time, and you can actually see like the cockpit, and you can see Star Fox sitting in the cockpit flying like around, and he like even animates and looks around and stuff. And like there are a couple of missions where you like play as Peppy. You can actually see Peppy in the cockpit just like flying towards you. And there's some really incredible boss fights against some much larger bosses, not just the dog fights, where it's really important just to be aware of what's going on because the weapons they're firing at you can come out of nowhere, and you really do have to be aware of what is going on. It's really cool, and I think combined with the motion controls, it's incredibly unique and nothing like anything I've ever played.
I think that maybe the linear, more corridor-based levels suffer, though, don't they? Because you have this free motion and the ability to aim, but then the problem becomes, oh, I'm just bashing into stuff because I have to go forward constantly. And I think that might be like where the trade-off comes, is like, okay, we have this control scheme that works wonderfully for this type of game mode that has in the past not been that great, but it maybe unfortunately impacts the traditional Star Fox stuff in a way that is a bit too negative. I don't know. Maybe that's why people are reacting badly to it, because that's what they like, is those on rails levels.
Exactly. I would argue the only reason on rail levels are in this game is because how much fans liked those levels in 64, and they weren't great in 64. And I definitely think they're slightly weaker in this game. And you're right. It's partly to do with that you're always moving forward. The whole ZL thing I was just talking about obviously doesn't even work in all range mode. The button does nothing.
Yeah.
And it's just different. But I think it's good that they didn't put in too many on rail levels in this game. Like that was a really good decision. Another bad thing that's just not great, not much fun, really slow. It's a gyrocopter. Now, to my knowledge, and I've played all the levels in this game bar 4, and there's only one gyrocopter level that I've played, and it's just a bit slow, it's a bit dull, it's very simplistic, it's not too exciting, but I can get over that personally because I think the other transformations really make up for it. I think the chicken walker, which is used a lot in this game, is really, really great. It really does feel like a walker, and that maybe doesn't make sense. But when you're playing it, do you feel like you're bobbing up and down a bit like you are running? And the chicken walker is used on many of the bosses that are the R-Wing. So obviously the R-Wing transforms into the chicken walker. There are many bosses, including the final boss, where you are having to swap between the two, and there's often corridors that you can run down inside of bosses and shoot like a central core, or sometimes there's like a large ship, and you have to land the chicken walker on the ship in order to shoot enemies on the ship's surface and then fly again. And it just feels quite exciting, like that transformation and all that. Like it's a real good point of this game, I would say.
Do you feel like the walker was I know it's a holdover from Star Fox 2, but maybe it's like this way for them to get those on foot sections into the game in a much more fluid way, in the sense that if you're on foot in Star Fox Assault, like, you have to go and run to a vehicle to get back into it. Like, but whereas the walker is the vehicle itself,
yes.
So you're on foot and you can instantly move from sky to land very smoothly.
Yeah, I never really thought of it like that, but you're absolutely right. It's like being on foot, but very slick and thematic, the way that it transforms, and it's just really cool. I wasn't a fan of this in 64, and they've basically kept it in this game, and that's obviously the branching paths. And
right.
I don't like hidden exits. I've said that about 2D platformers. It's the same in this game. There's a few other games that have it. Hidden exits I don't care for. I just want one linear path. I want a set of levels, and I want to play through those levels. This and the branching paths in this are slightly different to 64, where I think in this game I'm pretty sure there's only one proper path, but basically there are alternate paths, but they're considered like almost B routes, and there is actually like an A route that's the main route. as far as
But-
I'm aware.
Say you want to get those other levels, do you just have to start from the beginning for all of these runs, or can you jump into levels that you've been to before and try and unlock paths from there? Because I think that's something that really annoyed me about 64 was, hey, maybe I want to try these other levels, but I kind of have to start from the beginning every time.
So this game almost merged two modes from 64 into one mode. The main game in Zero is basically the main game of 64 merged with, I can't even remember what the mode is.
It's like arcade mode or something?
See, I want to say arcade mode, but there is another mode in this game called arcade mode that I can explain in a second. But it's basically a mode which allows you to pick any level individually. They basically merged the two. So anytime you pick main game, once you've completed the game, you can replay any level you want. And within those levels, obviously, there are alternate routes that you can access. So then you just go back into main game anytime you want. And that's cool. That works because the arcade mode in this game is almost the original hardcore. It's like a hardcore version of the main game from 64. Sorry, this is incredibly complicated.
Okay.
But the arcade mode in this game, as far as I'm aware, you get one life.
Wow.
And you just basically play for as long and go as far as you can.
Oh boy.
And you get like a score. And
that sounds like my least favorite thing in the world. It's basically a roguelike for Star Fox.
Saying roguelike is a very good term for Star Fox because like 64, this is a pretty short game. It's actually longer in my opinion. This took me maybe 4 hours to beat. Now, I did fail a lot. This is a very hard game at points. It does take a lot of getting used to, like I've said, about the controls. But ultimately, it's still, 15, 20 odd levels, I believe. It's not many. And it does emphasize, high scores and replayability and trying to beat your high scores, like, a roguelike or like 64.
Sure, yeah.
And that's another issue, and they talked about this on RFN, where it's just crazy that there's not online leaderboards. And here's the thing. They don't even have to do online leaderboards. They just really should do something, and you've not played it yet, but Pikmin 3 has a great system that's similar to Mario Kart, where you get these bar charts that basically show you how many people, out of the people who have played a level, what time or score they got. So it shows you, it shows you how well you've done in relation to the rest of the people who have played the level. They just should have had something like that implemented into this game because it feels like you're just playing against. It's like an arcade machine in your home. You're just literally playing against yourself again and again.
Yeah.
And it's not great. And I want to try and sink about 10 to 15 at least hours into this and replay a few missions. And it is really fun just to maybe replay the game, put on a podcast, fly through some levels, beat some bosses because it is just really, really fun to play. But I do like a high score every now and then, and it's just something they should have done.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing which hooks people to keep going and to best everyone on their friends list. That's part of the reason I played so much of Bit Trip Runner 2 was before every level it shows you, okay, here are the top 5 people on your friends list, and every time I was like, okay, I need to do as many dances while I'm doing this level, make sure I don't mess up at all. I want to jump over the mid-gate checkpoint, get all the points I can and make sure I have the bullseye at the end. All that stuff contributed to me going back to that game again and again, despite having just beaten the campaign in and of itself.
Exactly, and this game does have replay value. It could have had more.
Yeah.
I must also say there's an incredible tribute to Iwata at the end of this game. I won't get into details of what it is. It's not too big, but it's a nice touch, and it was something I didn't know about, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's nice to see for sure.
I want to play more of this game, but overall, I think I prefer it a lot more to Star Fox 64.
Do you think you need to be a certain type of person to enjoy this?
Yes.
Because I know you, Bally.
Yes.
I know you're the kind of guy who goes in there, grabs a new control scheme by the horns, and wants to tackle it to the ground. You're the person who will want to conquer something like that. Do you think that the faint of heart may not have as great a time with this because of that reason?
I think you do need two things. You need two things to play this game, which that blowing my own horn, I believe I have. So one, I believe you do have to know your way around space shooters to some degree, whether that's Star Fox 64 or like I've played quite a few Star Wars space shooters or something else. Like you do need to know techniques, just very basic techniques. I don't know how to explain them, but just braking to maximize your shots onto a boss, or working out where enemies are behind you and that sort of thing. It helps to have a general experience in that. Secondly, you do have to be incredibly open-minded to new control systems, and maybe we can get into this when we talk about Fates in a second, but you do definitely need to be prepared to accept that this doesn't play like 64 almost at all. If you want more Star Fox 64, you're going to hate this game. But if you're wanting the characters and the aesthetic of Star Fox 64 with a new, different control scheme, that definitely does take getting used to, like I've said. If you've got that open-mindedness and you do like a bit of a space shooter, I think this is an unbelievably great game. And like I said, the only big downside I can see is pretty much the gyrocopter, and that only takes like 20 minutes. So I'm not going to hold that against this game, because I think this is a really great game, and I'm really pleased I did pick it up. And I'd highly recommend it to anyone who can get close to those two criteria that I've outlined. But yeah, a game shouldn't have to have criteria. That might be the downside of this game, but highly recommend it. I'm going to maybe mention it again next week when I've sunk a few more hours in. But yeah, Star Fox Zero. I've also been playing some Birthright, which I know you're gonna take the lead on this one, MBZ, but I'm only up to chapter 7. I think you've played a little bit more than I have.
Oh, just a little bit.
A little bit.
Might have just beaten the game, that's all. Okay, Bally, let's talk about Fire Emblem.
Let's do this!
It's time to talk about Fire Emblem Fates, a game I've been waiting for an incredibly long time, and finally released in Europe. So, I have very deep thoughts on this game, which you can probably go into detail if you watch my Let's Play of Fire Emblem 6 The Binding Blade. The last couple episodes I've done, I've gone very deep into things that have irked me about Fates. I think the one thing to keep in mind is the reason Fates is probably not hitting me as hard as I thought it might is it is very much Awakening 2.0. In the sense that when Awakening came out, it was this brand new visual style. It was on 3DS for the first time. It had these new mechanics that were cool and interesting, though it took a little bit of time for me to warm up to them. And overall, introduced so many aspects that were very, very, fresh. And as a result, Awakening stood out a huge amount. Birthright feels like it's doing more of that, and then it made changes that piss me off as a Fire Emblem fan in the mechanics department. And so as a result, it looks gorgeous. I think it looks better than Awakening. It is absolutely stunning. The CG cutscenes are fantastic. All that stuff. Presentationally, it is on another level. It is kind of astounding that it's on 3DS still at this point in time. And though that stuff is great, I am very annoyed by other stuff, so that kind of clouds it to a degree.
Mechanics.
Yeah. So let's talk about weapon triangle, right? So the weapon triangle in this game, they fudged together. It feels like, okay, so the tactician class from Awakening, how they can use a sword and a tome.
Yes.
So that is one of the matchmaking things that has happened in the weapon triangle, where instead of just being a separate sword, axe, lance, you now have sword and tome, and then you have axe and bow together, and then you have lance and the new hidden weapon class. And I think this is particular to Birthright, because I'm not sure that the ninjas and the hidden weapon stuff are actually in Conquest for your own characters. I'm sure you fight against them because you...
What do you mean by hidden weapon? Have I not got here to that?
No, you have. Yet? So your ninja class, Kaze?
Yes.
So the weapon that he uses is a shuriken, and it's the same as your butler. You use Jacob, right, because you're a female character.
Throwing knives, yes.
Right, so those are both of the same weapon type, which is called the hidden weapon. So shurikens and that are lumped in with lances in this new weapon triangle. Mm-hmm. So the way that it annoys me is because they're all smudged together, it creates these scenarios that make zero sense in my Fire Emblem brain. For example, why can archers utterly destroy generals and knights? Because in every other game, they've done like 1 damage or 0 damage every time you engage an enemy, and it seems ridiculous that they have that sort of power. Number 2, why is it that when an archer fires against a magician, they have a lower hit rate? Because, this new triangle decides to put that into... Like, basically, all these different things in the context of the old classes that I know and love break my brain. And it doesn't make sense, like, from a lore perspective or from a mechanics perspective. And it annoys me because it puts me in situations where, because I'm so familiar with Fire Emblem, I think that something's going to work out in my favor. And then, wait a second, oh no, I left a bow person. And now because a lance person because a sword person has the advantage on bows. Like, usually, if a swordsman attacks an archer, they're going to dodge if they have high evasion. But because of the way the weapon triangle works, if I leave an archer in the way of someone who uses swords now, I'm probably going to get hit because they have an advantage for God knows what reason. And that mashing together, I think, was an attempt to simplify, but as a result, it's kind of alienated me. And I understand people are saying, it's all color-coded, but if it's color-coded, then I just think of the colors, right? And you're telling me, it's like Pokemon, fire beats water beats grass. But the problem is, if I think that way, then I'm only thinking about the colors, and I'm not thinking about the weapons themselves, and because there are 2 weapons per category, it just gets muddled in my brain. And I talk about this in the episode of Binding Blade I did, but I would love it if it was 2 separate triangles, independent of one another, but you still retained things like archers destroying Pegasus Knights and generals and knights being weak to magic with having low resistance. Like, that stuff should stay intact and having them separate, basically.
I almost think they put this in to make it simpler and more accessible.
Yes, I think you're right, but I think in the face of that, they have alienated people like me who don't get the new thing, right? Like, it's very much an accessibility thing for fresh players, but as a veteran player, it just doesn't make any logical sense. Like, it's a thing that I can get used to, but it just annoys me. It's just one of those kind of thorns in my side. I'm like, it's just, I wish it was different, And I think, like, maybe you were talking about with Star Fox before, it's like, people are like, I wish I just played with analog controls. It's like, I just wish the weapon triangle made more sense in my brain.
Do you think that's a fair comparison? Like, someone wanting Star Fox Zero with analog controls versus, someone wanting Fates with the original weapons triangle?
I mean, it's a much bigger deal for Star Fox because the whole game is predicated on that, but
I guess
it's similar enough. And then so the thing which has annoyed me the most, and the thing which I think is ridiculous and stupid, is the way that the weapons work in this game. So the weapons have no longer got a limited use to them. So in the past, you have however many uses, and then the weapon gets destroyed and goes away. In this game, they have unlimited uses, and as a result, you have some drawbacks to every weapon. The problem is, as you go up the weapon tree and you get better and better weapons, like you go from iron to steel to silver, the weapons get progressively worse in terms of the stuff they do to you when you use them. So, for example, you use a steel weapon, and your speed is, like, reduced, like, dramatically, to the point where you can't double anyone, and it would make more sense for you to use a weaker weapon because you get 2 hits in anyway, right? And that's happened before in Fire Emblem games, but the extent to which it is implemented here is so drastic and ridiculous that it makes no reason, like, it gives you 0 reason to use those higher tiered weapons. At this point in time, my ninja Kaze, who you've met and you've used at this point, is way more useful with a forged iron weapon than a silver weapon. So the forging is a whole different thing where you have to take 2 weapons and put them together, and there's all these resources that you throw into the smithy and he makes you a new weapon. So I have a +4 iron shuriken. That +4 iron shuriken is just as powerful as a silver shuriken, but it has 0 of the drawbacks. In fact, it has benefits to it because of, like, the base nature of what that weapon does. And so it makes it so that all these weapons that you can buy and get just become completely useless. Like, why would I ever use a silver shuriken if I can forge something that is better for this character anyway? And it just... it makes it so that I don't care about a lot of these things that you get as rewards. Like, oh, this enemy dropped this. It's like, well, fucking, I'm never going to use that, because you go into battle, you use the silver sword, let's say, and then the next turn, because you have all these stat drops, like you lower your resistance, you lower your defense, just for using the damn weapon, the next turn the enemy is going to be able to run in there and just slaughter you, because all your stats are lowered. And there's no way after you've attacked someone to change your weapon, unless of course you're doing an advanced tactic like standing someone else next to them and using the trade mechanic to influence their equipped weapon to change it at the top, which is something that, like, if you're an in-depth Fire Emblem fan, you would know to do. But god damn it, why do you do that to this game? It just has... I get it, they needed to add something to make it so that having weapons forever wasn't an overpowered thing, but this seems like a step too far, and it is the one thing that annoys me the most about this game. And I know you're not far enough to experience that yet, but...
Yeah, I'm trying to put myself in your position, and like, obviously you've played far more Fire Emblem games than I have. I've played 2 to completion, and I've dabbled in Sacred Stones. And I'm just trying to think, to be honest, I've actually played more Fire Emblem than Advance Wars, but imagine I'd played all the Advance Wars. I do plan on playing a couple more, hopefully this year. But I know for a fact that they use a very, very regimented system that barely changes, and obviously they add in a couple of things. But I can imagine myself if they suddenly said, okay, here's the 3DS Advance Wars, here's a new system, we're going to take away the old system, here's the new system. Yeah, I can definitely see myself coming up against that and thinking, ugh, I just wish they'd, stuck with the old system. But my experience of this system so far is it's different. It feels different. And I mean, one thing you've not mentioned yet is just now, similar to Awakening, in the way that you could get bonus attacks from your sort of allies next to you, now your enemies also get bonus attacks.
Yes.
And I found, like I said, I'm only up to chapter 7, but I almost died on quite a few characters, and I'm playing on normal classic, so I was quite relieved that they survived, because I was going to restart the level. But
yeah,
it just feels like there's a lot more layers to think about, beyond even the weapons triangle or anything. There's a lot more strategic placement of units, far more so, especially in Awakening, where, like you've mentioned, and I agree with you on the show, that your units can become complete tanks, and once you're paired up, you're pretty invincible. And I'm actually willing to give this new pairing system, the benefit of the doubt, and you can tell they've really tried just to make it not overpowered, and there is more to think about. But I'm hoping that after a few more chapters playing in this system, that by the time I'm on the later, tougher chapters, I'll have adapted and gotten my head around how it works and benefited from it. Because I mean, so far it's not giving me problems, but I am enjoying it. Like, I think it's great, and it is different. I'm not going to deny that, but so far it is growing on me.
And of course, you love the aesthetics of things like this. Has playing Awakening like dampened that like it has for me, do you think?
As in, like, oh my god, here's a CGI 3D Fire Emblem. No, because I do think that there is a step up, and a big criticism of mine about Awakening was the lack of how scarce those incredible cutscenes were, and it does feel initially like I am more engaged with this story than I was at the start of Awakening. I found the first 5-6 hours of Awakening quite a slog, and that wasn't just it being a new Fire Emblem game. It was the systems of that game and pairing were quite tricky. It's really weird. I'm actually finding this a smoother game to get into than I did Awakening. Having played, like I said, Fire Emblem 7 and Sacred Stones, which have identical systems, I found the pairing system of Awakening harder to get into. But once I was into it, obviously I loved it. But this game so far, Fate's Birthright, it's incremental, and I feel like they're getting better at creating Fire Emblem games for beginners. And I'm not saying I'm a beginner, but I you know me, I love a tutorial. I love a slow and easy ramp up in difficulty. And
Absolutely.
so far I'm getting that with Birthright, which I'm liking.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from. I think like your comment about making a Fire Emblem for beginners is like what makes me annoyed about it, you know?
Yeah,
because I'm not a beginner.
Yeah.
But I do think that this game is definitely much more challenging.
Which is why you played on hard classic.
Right, yeah, that was a smart move. If you want to hear that story, definitely go listen to the video. So where I come down on it is definitely a more challenging game than Awakening, and the reason I really liked Awakening is because you could be God. Like, that pair-up system was so ridiculously overpowered.
But then there's no strategy.
No, I know, but that was a power trip that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Whatever it may be, like, it was a different thing, it was a different sort of Fire Emblem game. And this one, definitely you feel more fragile, you feel, like, much more vulnerable. And as a result, like, the situations where you have to stand units next to one another to get the extra damage, they never feel like it's really worth doing because you don't get defensive benefits from it, and so you really get punished hard for enemies going at your units.
It's proper glass cannon formation. Like, you're like, I have to wipe out everyone right now, or I'm gonna get screwed because I'm open. And yeah, you're right. If you know that there's going to be some enemies in your vicinity at the end of the turn, it's very reckless to be in that position. It's much better doubling up. You're right.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason I was not enjoying that system to start with was I hadn't decided on who I was going to pair together. And so all the support conversations I was getting were all really random, like this person and that person who I didn't want to go with that. But like all these like weird things were happening. So I was like C rank with this person, B rank with that person. And there wasn't this kind of unity to it, which that's what I liked about Awakening, was deciding you and you are going to go together and make a child, and you and you and you and you, and like figuring out who these pairings were going to be. And then every battle you would start out and say, okay, I need to pair up these two and these two and these two and these two, and off they go, and they all work really well together. And again, like I get to kind of chapter 13, 14, 15 in this game, and I decide, you know what, I'm going to try and do that now. I'm going to try and play it as if it was Awakening. And it made it so much more playable because the pair-up system in this game, though not as powerful because you don't have your partner coming in for an extra attack, on the defensive end is so much more reliable because your units have the ability to jump in front of them and take 0 damage. And that may be a thing that happens here and there, but it is so crucial when you're facing off against a bunch of enemies who are kind of rushing you and you need to have some kind of wall. And that is the only way to create a wall in this game, is to pair people up. On their own, they really are glass cannons, like you said. Like, there are not very good defensive characters in this game. And so my tradition of like taking the knight and sticking him at a choke point and then having the mage kind of ping from behind doesn't work unless you're paired up with people. And once I did that, once I got into just playing it like Awakening and having to think a little bit more and not just charge in there and like play it more like, say, a Fire Emblem 7 or a Path of Radiance, then it clicked. And then I was like, okay, I'm enjoying myself now. I get this system. I know what I need to do. And there are some units who I think are powerful enough to be on their own. Units like your own, like Corrin on their own, can do really good damage, and standing next to someone really helps with, taking people out who have large amounts of HP. Felicia, goddammit, is fucking awesome. Oh my god. You have Jacob because you chose the female Corrin. But the butler/maid class is so good because not only do you have the healing, and in Birthright the healing staves are ranged, which means that you can be at a diagonal or one space away from someone, and these festal staves will heal you instead of the heal wand being right next to a unit. So you can be a distant from people to heal them. You have the dagger weapon, which again adds this extra layer, which is when you use the dagger, it lowers an enemy's stats. And so that plays into like, okay, this attack on its own is only going to do like maybe 3 damage, but it will lower the defense of the enemy so that my sword guy can come in and kill it in one hit, as opposed to not being able to take them out. And at first I was a little like, step backish on like, oh, now they're adding kind of stat debuffs into Fire Emblem. But the further I get on and the further I got like really cool weapons, like Felicia gets a weapon called the Flame Shuriken, which is like, it makes her god mode against mages, because she has huge resistance, so she'll take 0 damage from them. And because the Shuriken is a physical weapon, but it uses her magic stat, it basically does physical damage from her magic amount of things she has, her stat, and as a result she just becomes a wrecking crew, like just tears through every magic unit possible and is unstoppable. And then Kaze later on gets like a shuriken that can attack from 3 spaces away, so you have room to like, okay, I want to chip here to get the stats lowered, then I can bring in someone with an archer to do that, and then I can bring someone in straight away to do that. Like, whereas usually on a boss, for example, you'd have to have just one person who's like 1 space away and then one person who's standing right next to them, so you can never get that third attack in unless you have something like a longbow, and that really helped a huge amount as well. So you can tell there are things I really like about the game. Like, I'm very much invested in all the child things and getting them and doing the power logs. That was great fun, and grinding out support levels, getting everyone to S rank. All the My Castle stuff, which maybe we can talk about next time when you've played more Fire Emblem Fates, but that stuff seems, I don't know, it's kind of hit and miss. It's not really something that's standing out to me, but you kind of need to do it if you want to get those forged weapons, as I said earlier on, which make things much more playable. But yeah, lots of flaws, lots of things wrong, but I think at a base level, it's a very good game. It's a very good game. I'm being overly critical because I love Fire Emblem and I want it to be better, and things about this game really frustrate me. But I think at this point, I know the mechanics well enough. I may not like them, but I know them well enough that I think I can safely go into Conquest and see if, the better level design there and, the higher difficulty challenges me to a point where I feel like it's more of the Fire Emblem experience that I want. And I hope it is. I'm looking forward to playing Conquest. So we'll see.
Do you think you're going to finish up Conquest for next time?
Oh God, no, definitely this. So my plan with
slow.
Yeah, my plan with Conquest is to just take my time with it, to enjoy it, and to like maybe play on Classic and just really drill into making sure that I know what I'm doing and I can beat these stages. That'll probably fall to pieces. I'll probably be, fuck, I'm a baby, I need to go casual now.
I've heard it is pretty tough, but that does sound like at least an action plan. I
mean, Birthright is a tough game in its own right. It's not really impossibly hard, but it's difficult. I think you're going to struggle with it. I think you'll have problems because it is no Awakening. You are not like invincible tanks anymore, and I think that, it'll be a good challenge for you, actually. I think the lack of save states and the fact that you want to play on Classic definitely is going to make this a different experience for you, Bally.
At what chapter am I going to drop down from normal Classic to normal casual?
Oh dear, I don't know. Well, it was chapter 9 when I did it because I got critted on the boss, and the map was, quite frankly, really boring and full of a bunch of just bog standard enemies, and it took me ages. And so I ended up just doing it then because I'm like, you know what, I just don't want this to happen. It's inconvenient. And the thing is, Birthright, I just wanted to fucking plow through it and get it done so I can talk about it as much as possible on the show. Now with Conquest, I feel like I can take my time with it. So
cool.
You don't necessarily need to just bust your way through Birthright. So
I wouldn't be able to.
No, I know you wouldn't be able to. So yeah, God, that was slight rantiness. But Fire Emblem Birthright, it's probably going to end up being the weakest of these 3 games. So I'm glad I got it out of the way first, and I'm looking forward to the other 2. Lots of things ahead. So. And
for the noob take of Birthright, tune in next time.
Yeah.
When I will hopefully have played a bit more of the game.
Yeah.
And it won't be as much of a technical discussion, but it will be a valuable discussion nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about how pretty the graphics are and how cool the music is. By the way, the music's really good in this game. I think there are some standout tracks for sure. And I'll probably play one right now.
Celtic tunes.
Yeah, so let's go into
Yeah.
the break. Let's listen to some music from Fire Emblem Fates, and we'll see you on the other side with some emails. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. It's that time again. It is time for some of your emails. We've got a few lined up, but before I get into those, I'm going to remind everyone of the email address, which of course is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We always need more. So, the first email this week is from Acerbis. It's me, Acerbis, your favourite and only competition winner, here writing into my favourite of many podcasts. I thought I might give you guys some game recommendations, considering Nintendo isn't giving you anything to play this year. Joking aside, I'm kind of relieved for the chance to make 2016 the year I conquer my backlog, and I think some people should think twice about criticizing Nintendo about releasing too few games and then complaining about how many games they have on their backlogs. Anyway, on to some recommendations. For MBZ, I'd recommend 999, or to give it its full title, Zero Escape Volume 1, 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors for the DS. The Zero Escape series is one that is often recommended to fans of Danganronpa, and personally I prefer the storytelling in 999 and its sequel Virtue's Last Reward on 3DS and Vita, and the final installment is one of the very few games that we know of coming out for Nintendo systems between now and March 2017, so this might be a good series to go back to and play this year. For Bally, I think a nice shortish platformer is in order after your quite long RPG-focused start of the year with Xenoblade and Fire Emblem. I think I remember vaguely you having some slightly positive feelings about Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Quick public service announcement, you can get Nintendo Select's Tropical Freeze for like 16 quid on Amazon right now. So how about Donkey Kong Country 2 for the SNES? This is a 2D platformer with a great aesthetic and the best level of variety I've ever played. It's on Wii U Virtual Console, and I think, Bally, you could get it on new 3DS, but I'm not certain. Thanks, and keep up the fantastic work.
All right, really cool that he's sending us some recommendations this year. I do want to kind of hit that point that he makes that, like, of course, everyone talks. I think this is a big problem, mainly just in the media, about how the slate is so empty for Nintendo and they're not releasing anything. And obviously that's bad for market conditions and getting people into their ecosystem and, you know, just overall appearance to the outside world. But when you stand back and think about it, like, everyone is always complaining about how they never have time to play any games ever, and there is always too many, and the backlogs are always enormous. And I think that's something that we embrace here on this show, is the fact that we may not actually be that down in the dumps about having 0 games this year, because we play loads of old stuff anyway, and we have enormous backlogs. So I appreciate that being called out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like one of these just sort of things that, you know, that when you get obsessed with E3 and the hype and what's new, the latest, the best stuff that's coming out, you kind of have to step back, you're right, and think, you know, the capitalism train is rolling pretty hard. We need to slow down and make sure we're not wasting on spending any money and actually play the stuff we've got. You know, like our parents used to tell us, like, why do you need another game? You've not finished that one. You've already got. It's like, yes, Mum, I'll finish my backlog and then I can get my new game.
Exactly. So, yes, I appreciate that sentiment. Also appreciate, because this was something that Jonathan Metz recently did on his kind of episode back on RFN. He gave the crew members some recommendations. Maybe, Bally, you and I can give each other a couple of recommendations after we talk about these ones. I definitely have been very curious about the Zero Escape series for a little while. I first heard it being talked about on RFN, actually. James Jones talked about 999 eons ago, like 4 or 5 years ago, and I was always curious about it, and that was before I'd played Danganronpa. I think the one thing that puts me off 999 specifically is the lack of voice acting. That's something that I think Danganronpa helps like drive me forward through, is there is so much voice acting. It's much easier to engage with the characters in the story from that perspective, and it's less of like, it feels less like you're actually reading a novel and more like it's an interactive experience. I feel like 999, from the little that I've seen and played of it, it is kind of just very text heavy, and I'm not sure how the puzzles will work out, but it is something that I'm looking to maybe check eventually. I don't know, I have access to it, I just haven't, like, I've booted up like twice, and every time I've been like, okay, I don't want to read anymore. I'm kind of like getting, it's very I don't know, it's very first world problems. It's like I want my things to be read out to me instead of having to engage my brain. But that's how it is. I've heard, I think, that Virtue's Last Reward has voice acting, and people have said that you don't necessarily need to play 999 to play VLR. It's just like it helps with the wider story. And I guess it would probably enlighten me for the third game when that comes out. But yeah, I don't know. I have access to a Vita and 3DS, obviously, so I can play both these games at some point eventually. Maybe it'll happen this year, I don't know. There's lots of stuff to play. But yeah, I do appreciate the recommendation, and it is one that is in my mind, certainly. So thanks, Service, for that.
Donkey Kong Country 2. It is sort of a prime candidate of a game that I would this is my vision for the show, and I've said this before, but it is that glorious day when we will beat our backlogs, and I can look to the eShop, look to what I've not played in the past, and think, hey, I'll pick that up, I'll play it, and I'll talk about it on the next show. Like, that's an ideal situation to be in, rather than delving back into your backlog. If I was in that position, a game like Donkey Kong Country 2 would be really near the top of my list. I really enjoyed the first game, and a lot of people do think that the second game in that trilogy is the best one. So I completely agree, and I think it might be quite a cool game to play on my new 3DS. Certainly with that new SNES emulation that they've got going on the Virtual Console there. So yeah, top pick. Thank you very much for that recommendation. That is a game that will be played one day, maybe even this year, but we'll see about how I get through my backlog. Should be interesting.
Yeah, it should be. I believe Super Nintendo games on new 3DS have save states, so it should be.
They will be
fine
much
on that
needed
front.
on a game like Donkey Kong Country.
Definitely. Okay, so let's do a couple recommendations for each other real quick. I know you're going to tell me to play Pikmin 3, Bally. I already have it. It's sitting here.
I know, it's top of my list, so it's ideal that you have the game that's top of my list for you to try out.
Mine is obviously going to be Super Meat Boy. I know that you're drowning in everything right now, but Super Meat Boy, Bally, you have to play before 2016 is over. It is the best 2D platformer ever made. I love it to bits. It is like part of the reason why Ori and the Blind Forest is like one of my favorite games ever, because that, the whole masochistic platforming, quick deaths, quick retries, like that whole notion was built from this tree, and that tree has grown many branches, and there are many other games like it, but you need to start the source. So that's what I'm going to go with for you, Bally.
Cool. Yeah, I think that would be quite a good game to play this year, and obviously with it coming out on the Nintendo platform this year, we could argue that
this game was supposed to come out in 2008 on the Wii, and Jesus, it defies belief that it is.
I mean, I was going to say we could probably argue that we could slip it into top 5 games of the year list if we feel like it.
Well, you know what? I would not be, I wouldn't
You would
argue
not be
against that.
adverse to that idea.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting.
Exactly.
So yeah, like you said, I think Pikmin 3 is a game. I was going to say Metroid, but Metroid Prime, sorry, but I think you're very aware of what Metroid Prime is, and you've seen Let's Plays, and you've even played brief periods of both 1 and 2 now. I think you've got more of an idea of what that game is, and I'm not going to bet my money that it's something that will necessarily click with you. So I'm not going to say like that's on your list, but I would definitely get wholeheartedly behind Pikmin 3 because you've not played a Pikmin game. I think you've never sort of delved into what Pikmin's all about, and I just think Pikmin 3 is such a clean, crisp, enjoyable version of Pikmin on the Wii U, and it's just a great game if you've not played it before to try Nintendo's take on a real-time strategy game, and I think it's pretty cool. So I'm intrigued to see what you think of that when you finally get around to playing it.
Well, once all this Fire Emblem's out of the way, I might have some time, but we'll see.
So much fire. Drowning in Fire Emblem.
Drowning in it.
The next question is from Sanjeet. It's from the UK. Dear Jar Jar and Binks, as you both know, I've taken an unhealthy interest in MBZ's moderately decent YouTube channel for a number of years now. I therefore know that you are not only big fans of Star Wars, but also the prequel trilogy. Unfortunately, I cannot go with you on this point. While the prequels did something for expanding the Star Wars universe and will always have an element of nostalgia for me, double-bladed lightsaber was like catnip to my 9-year-old self, they are overwhelmingly terrible, and despite loving them as a kid, I can now not make it through a sitting of them. I had a similar experience with the Star Wars Episode 1 game for PlayStation 1. As a kid, it was a grand and epic adventure. Now it is a pixely mess with terrible jump controls, an awful camera angle, and a frustrating combat system. So my question to you is this. What game did you used to love as a kid, but have come to realize as an adult, all nostalgia aside, was embarrassingly terrible? Yours sincerely, Sanjeet the Idiot. P.S. MBZ's hair is lacking in artistic direction at the moment. I think he needs to shave it all off and start fresh.
You know why my hair's so big, Bally?
Why is your hair so big?
It's because when you're a child of Indian descent, you usually go through this process called a mundan when you're younger, which is
right.
Your
you've told me this in the past before, actually.
Your hair all gets shaved off when you're like maybe 1 year old or 1.5 or something. And the idea behind it is by doing that, the hair that grows back will be way thicker and richer and will last for like a much longer time. Okay. So I think that if I shave off and start fresh, it may be catastrophic. And my hair may take over the world, Bally, is what I'm saying.
You didn't have that when you were 1?
No. Exactly. No, I did have that when I was 1.
You did have it?
Yes.
I
had
have quite thick hair, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah. My sister had it done to her as well. We were full of thick hair. Yeah, exactly. It's a tradition, and it was done to me. So that's what I'm saying. If it happens again, the apocalypse may come, Bally. My hair may just become uncontrollable. So I wouldn't say that Sanjeet should push it there. On that nose. But let's get to the question itself. It's funny he brings up the Star Wars Episode 1 game on PS1.
That was like a game of our childhood. Like,
right,
it was huge.
I played that game all the time. I remember like everyone being around at my house at birthdays and stuff, and we'd look up the cheat codes for it and put those in and just like give ourselves invincible health, go to the last level, just like bust our way through. And like you look at it now, and oh my god, what a catastrophe
so
of a
pointy.
game! It's terrible. It not only does it look awful, but it plays like garbage. Like the camera angle stuff he was saying is absolutely on point. It's like this weird pseudo MGS1 like kind of isometric, but not like in the same way. It's terrible. So. Yeah, that's that. I can agree with him on that one. I say another one is the Rugrats game. I can't remember what it was called, but on PS1 there was this Rugrats game.
I remember coming to your house and you were stuck on this boss.
Yeah.
And I played as like the giant Reptar Godzilla-esque robot, and I had to like beat up on this big snail. And I don't actually think I did it, but I almost did it. And just
we got
so
close so many times.
Just by almost being able to do it, you were like, "Whoa, you're so good at this!" I'm like,
"Yeah,
I can button mash."
Yeah, no, that whole thing was just this like deluge of mini games and weird park attractions, and I really loved it back then.
Based on the Rugrats from Paris.
Yes, exactly. And the Eiffel Tower was in there. It was all weird and crazy. But yeah, you go back to that now, and oh my god, it's terrible. It's just not good at all. So that's one. Bally, do you have a pick here?
A game I enjoyed at the time, but when you go back is like tough to play. You know, you're gonna hate this answer, but my cousin was around like, I don't know, last year, maybe a year and a half ago, and he's just still absolutely obsessed by Pokemon. And he was fascinated by my N64, so I had to show him all my Pokemon games. And we were playing Pokemon Stadium with each other, and I don't know, it didn't hold up as well as I remember.
Don't say it, Bally. Don't say it.
It was just kind of like, I don't know, because you know, when you're playing someone locally with that game,
yes,
and you're not linking up with the Game Boy games, you're renting Pokemon temporarily to fight them against your opponent, and it's this awkward thing where you have to, one of us walks out the room while the other one picks, and then they come back and my 6 guys are all secret, and
oh god,
it's cool, but I don't know.
It was a very light experience. It was an experience that was predicated on ownership of the real Pokemon games. Like, you had to get the most out of that game, you had to own Blue or Red or Gold or Silver or whatever. Like, you absolutely were not going to have the best time if you were just renting Pokemon constantly, because most of the time they were just terrible and the moveset sucked and everything was really bad. So if you wanted to try and go through like the single player gyms and everything, you'd have a really tough time.
And to be fair to those games, they were very good you could put in Gold, Silver, Red, Blue, Crystal, Yellow, whatever, put it in, get the Pokemon on there, like, you can save them, take the cart out, your friend can then get their cart, put their team in, so you can actually save up all the teams and just pick the team straight away to go against each other. Like, so all that stuff is good. So I'm not going to try and say Pokemon Stadium is anything like aged as badly as Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
No, of
it's
course not.
It holds up well. It's totally something we could have a fun time with. I just was a bit like, oh wow, this is...
it's not quite how you remember it.
Yeah, maybe it's because my cousin, he's never gotten into, the metagame like we obviously used to, and maybe that was part of it, where I was just kicking his ass because I just knew more about Pokemon than him, and maybe that's what hurt it a bit. But I don't know. There's not many other games I can really think of that I've played. I mean, obviously the classic Tarzan on GameCube. That's not exactly a fun game to go back to. But I've never really tried that. But I'm sure there's others, but nothing to the same degree, I think, as Star Wars Episode 1.
Kind of jumping off your Pokemon Stadium thing, this kind of ties in with how Giant Bomb have revealed to me over this past couple of years that minigame collections and minigame things that we used to love
oh my God, good
are
shout.
nowhere near as good.
Shout.
Part of that was recently on Unprofessional Fridays, Dan Reichert was like, hey guys, let's play the Pokemon Stadium minigames. And I was like, oh yeah, those are really fun. I remember those being great. And then I watched them play them and I was like, Jesus, these are terrible. Like, they're so fucking bad.
I would argue the ones in Pokemon Stadium 2 are way, way, way better than 1.
No, you say that, but like Dan came back the week after with Stadium 2 to be like, these are better, guys, and they were just as bad. Like, they just weren't. Yeah, they were not anywhere close to what I remember being, amazing.
But I mean, in terms of minigames, you're right, and obviously Giant Bomb with their Mario Party series.
Yes.
Mario Party is a great shout for this question, because when we were young, Mario Party, it was up on a pedestal higher than, Mario Kart, higher than Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
It really was higher than those games for a long time.
It was like the multiplayer game we played the most.
Exactly, because our stupid little minds couldn't get into something that was heavier than, mini game collections, as sad as that sounds. So I think... And even watching Giant Bomb's Mario Party, you do realize those games are just so terribly broken. They're incredibly luck-based. They are, like, the animations are horrible. Like, it's just, ugh.
Just, like, the mechanics and the controls are just terrible. Like, they are made by Hudson, right? And they're not, like, internal Nintendo-developed products. And as such, like... from a fluidity standpoint, it just feels like garbage. Like, you play a real Mario game and then you play Mario Party, and it's like the controls are just god awful. It's just horrific, really.
It really is, and Mario Party might do well on the nostalgia list for us, but it's not. It
gets nowhere close to our top 50 games of all time. I'll tell you that.
Oh no. But good question, Sanjeet. We always love reminiscing about.
And I would like to call out Sanjeet for his Wittertainment reference at the start of his email. So
very good.
Wink and a nod.
A wink and a nod to those few people who know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
But anyway, so our final question this week is from Ben, who's got a couple of emails, but we're going to do two in one. Hey guys, so I have a bit of a problem. I recently added up all of my games in my backlog, and the total time it would take to beat them all is a staggering 88 days and 13 hours. Pretty crazy. So I was wondering, how long do you think your backlogs will take to beat, and how confident are you that they will get beaten? How about we answer that question before his second part?
Oh boy, how confident am I that they'll get beaten? Not confident at all.
Can we just say your backlog is about 10 times the size of mine?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Oh god, so when I really break it down, like the amount of games I actually own, because of stuff on Steam, it just becomes absurd. And it gets to this point where there are so many things I have on Steam that I have deliberately hidden from my library because I know that I'm never going to play them. There's just stuff I'm not interested in. And, given infinite time, I'd probably try them. But I don't have that luxury. And as a result, I have decided, I'll try and get through these things that I've allocated here, or things that I want to play. And that's the sort of stuff where I will definitely get through the stuff that I care about and that I'm interested in. But it'll take a long time, and by that time, new things come out, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger because sales happen. It's a self-perpetuating cycle, and at this point, I'm just not confident that it will ever be finished. It's not feasible these days. So yeah, I'd like to actually add things up and see, but I'm kind of scared to do that, to be quite honest, because when you see something like 88 days and 13 hours, that's intimidating, and I'm pretty sure mine is kind of close to that, so.
I'm actually in quite a confident position right now. If you'd asked me this question when we started the podcast, almost 3 years ago now.
Geez, don't tell me that. That's a long time out.
3 years ago, can you believe? I would have been like, no, there's no way I'm ever going to, play all of those ambassador games that you get on the 3DS, all of, other Wii games, Wii U games I bought, Game Boy Advance games, DS games, whatever. I would have been like, nope, I'm never going to play all of them. That's just futile. I didn't believe in backloggery back then.
Now you're being converted.
Exactly. But now, and I've been like this for a few months now, probably a bit longer than that, I feel like I do have a manageable number of games, even if you count, that horrendous Humble Bundle that completely knocked me off my I was on the home stretch of my backlog, and then it just completely added on an extra 3 laps. But they're great games, and on the Humble Bundle, I should say, and I will defeat my backlog. I think, bearing in mind you're right, 2016 is going to be quite sparse for games. I mean, I've just bought, Fates and Star Fox Zero. That's like Nintendo's 2 biggest games this year by some way, unless you obviously count Pokemon, and maybe something like Kirby Robobot, which I believe is out like next month. So once you've got those 4 games, there's really not too much. So, and I don't know if I'll pick up Kirby, and I'll probably pick up Pokemon, or who knows, I might get both of them. But otherwise, I've got a lot of time. Summer's coming up. There's a lot more time off work and stuff like that, where I'm keen to, play a few more games. And I think it's doable. I think my backlog, it's roughly about 24 to 26 games at the moment. I think start of 2017, I could have it down to as low as, like 14 games, 10 games. I could say, potentially. And maybe that's not including, some N64 games that I am eventually going to go back to, because there are some GameCube games I'd like to try and tackle first. But I'd love to get to around that position by the end of the year. And I think it's doable.
Yes, I agree. Your Nintendo-only loyalty has served you well in this scenario, Pally.
It has worked out well. Because I do have a lot to play, and they're great quality games. And I accept I'm missing out on some stuff, but I think it's for the amount of money I'm putting in, it's quite a good deal I'm getting back.
Absolutely.
Shall we go to his second part?
Yes.
So this is his second email. I love listening to podcasts while playing games, and I know you guys love your podcasts, so I would love to hear your recommendations. So, MBZ and Bally, which podcasts do you recommend? I already listened to RFN, Giant Bomb, and of course, you guys. Thanks, Ben. IS, the Holy Trinity.
That is a trilogy of almighty godliness. I will say, we're there. We're part of the Triforce of power in the podcast world. We've answered stuff like this before, Bally, but
yes.
Times change, times move. We're always listening to different podcasts here and there.
They come and go.
So yeah, let's shout some out. Is there something that you want to pick here?
Well, let's start on video games and Nintendo. Obviously, the ones you've picked, RFN, Giant Bomb, and ourselves, are fantastic podcasts. Sticking with Giant Bomb East, the Beastcast, it's called.
Yes.
It is fantastic. It's not quite as great as, I'd say, the West Coast one, in my opinion, for a number of reasons, but in general, it's very different. It's very distinct, and I think, for me personally, Vinny Caravella is one of the most hilarious men on the planet. And obviously he used to be with Giant Bomb West, but he's really captured like what he's good at and being hilarious over on the East Coast with oh my god, names
Austin Alex,
Walker,
Jeff Backlog,
and Alex Navarro. The four of them have a really great chemistry on the mics, and it's very distinct, like I said, from West Coast, but it's still very Giant Bomb, and it's very Vinny, and I love it. I think it's great. I'd highly recommend that.
That's a very good pick. For me, very recently, obviously the closure of game trailers was a big deal, but they came back as Easy Allies, and before that happened, I was really into GT Time, which was the Game Trailers news-focused podcast, which was hosted by Kyle Bossman. It's an hour 15 long, really bite-sized. He's such a great host because he always moves around different members, makes sure everyone's talking, getting their opinion shared, always asking questions. He has great timing on everything. His show on his own is fantastic. At the moment, he's doing one called Bossman at Home, which is the spiritual successor to the final Bossman, which was his GT show. But their new podcast, the Easy Allies podcast, is really, really good. It's news-focused, of course, as I said, but they have lots of fun stuff they do as part of the show. They have Giant Beastcast. They do a correction segment. They do that at the start of every show. They have these distinct segments that feel like you always want to return to them. I think it's one of the reasons why Colin Moriarty and Greg Miller got so big with Beyond. Was Beyond felt like this podcast that was very regular in terms of its structure. There was all these little mini segments and jingles and things that went along with them that made it feel like its own cohesive package. And I think the Beastcast has some of that, and I think that also the Easy Allies podcast has that. And one of the fun things they do is at the end of every episode, they make a bet, and they have the running tally as the episodes go on. And so by the end of however long, the year or whatever, they tot it up and see who won over the course of the year. But it's always really fun to follow that stuff because it's okay, next week, if I check the top 10 reviews of Ratchet and Clank, how many times will the word movie be said in the review because the movie's coming out? And so they all bet on that and see what their predictions are. And then the week after, they find out and give each other points. It's just a really fun end show thing that I think more people should do, and those guys are great. And they have a rotating cast because there's 9 of them, really smart people. They talk great stuff about Nintendo generally. They're very well informed on handheld stuff, on Nintendo stuff generally, on Japanese RPGs, and they really are a good listen if you like Nintendo but also want a multi-format podcast. So I will give those guys hell of a shout out. Listen to them.
Another quick shout out for a Nintendo podcast is Nintendo Voice Chat.
Right, yeah, he didn't mention that on this list.
So it's Jose Otero at IGN. It's the IGN Nintendo podcast. They are really great for staying on top of Nintendo news and actually listening. A big criticism that we've both made clear on this show a number of times is that when you get commentators and journalists who start talking about cross-platforms, there are very few who have a really in-depth knowledge of Nintendo, and it's often something that is skirted over, or they used to love Nintendo but now they don't know much about Nintendo at all. And I'm not going to name names, but there are lots of people out there who just are quite frustrating to listen to because they just don't follow Nintendo, but they have a lot to say about Nintendo, and it's quite frustrating. And these guys, Jose Otero, Per Schneider,
Brian
Altano, they are all incredibly knowledgeable about Nintendo. I would criticize them occasionally that they can sometimes go off on a topic that I just don't care about. They used to be very into Amiibo. I know there will be listeners right now who will be very keen on Amiibo and will be keen to listen to that, but they went off a bit on that. But in general, they're just really great at talking about the stuff that matters and being knowledgeable about Nintendo. A great weekly podcast, great production quality, and I'd highly recommend that.
Yeah, and then I've got a couple of other quick hits. There's a second Easy Allies podcast which is called Frame Trap, which is kind of their version of the Bombcast. It's a much longer, like 2.5 hour show where they talk about what they've been playing and everything. That's fun. Also, very recently, Danny O'Dwyer of GameSpot fame has started a podcast with two of his friends from Ireland called A Tournament of Lies. It's really great. So this podcast called A Tournament of Lies, basically, they get people to send in a list of like 3 video games from all time, all history, whatever, just send in 3 video games. And every week they go through like a few of these lists, and they are basically ordering every video game of all time in history in like quality order, like a massive, basically, instead of like a top 100, it's like just the top of every game ever, and they're just ranking them, and it's really fun to listen to. And they have this thing called the Purgatory of Lies, which is if neither of them or none of them have played a game, they put like a game into the bin, and then they'll have to go and play that the next week and then come back and report and then decide where it goes in their rankings. That's a really fun show. That's just this weird idea of let's just rank every game ever, because that's a fun, stupid thing to do. So yeah, if you've not heard of that, he's doing that like independent of GameSpot. That's just him on his own doing his own thing, and I think it's real fun. So
shall we drop a couple of podcasts that we both listen to that are non-gaming?
Sure.
So I should say I listen to a lot of politics podcasts, sports podcasts to do with football and running and all sorts. I won't get into those because I'm sure not many people are too interested in those. Or if you are, tweet at me and I can let you know. But me and MBZ, we're both keen. I was going to mention Cast of Kings.
Yes.
So if you're into Game of Thrones, and especially for someone like me who's not read the books, so my knowledge of Game of Thrones is relatively shallow, but I'd say it's far more enhanced than the majority of purely show watchers as a result of mainly this podcast, and obviously speaking to you, MBZ.
Yes.
But basically, Game of Thrones is complicated, and if you're someone like me who's not read them, but you're really keen on the lore and finding out what on earth is going on, Cast of Kings comes out every week after the most recent episode, and they do a rundown of the entire episode and say like what on earth was happening, where it's going to lead to. They have theories, and it's really great because one of the hosts, can you help me with some names, MZ?
Dave Chen and Joanna Robinson.
Dave Chen and Joanna Robinson. They have a great dynamic because Dave Chen has not read the books, bar one. He's read the first one now.
Yes.
But Dave Chen's not read the books, and Julia
no, not Julia Roberts.
Julia Roberts.
Joanna Robinson.
Joanna Robertson, same thing. She's like, read all of them, and she writes blog posts about everything, and she's just an absolute knowledge of Game of Thrones. And
a savant, one might say.
A savant. And they just work off each other very nicely, where Dave Chen will kind of poke theories at Joanna, and she'll be like, nope, can't comment. Oh. And it's quite good. And it's a really great way of having a step up on your friends who have watched Game of Thrones and actually knowing a bit more than them. It's quite good fun for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of our other loves of Star Wars has recently got us digging into the Star Wars podcast scene. And we both are listening to a podcast called Full of Sith, which is a great name for a podcast, first of all. That's just, like, really great. But it's a show where they just talk about Star Wars things every week. And
if you thought we like Star Wars...
Oh, boy.
we are
one of the hosts of this show saw episode 1 70-something times when it came out. And most of these people saw Force Awakens like over 20 times in the cinema. They're fanatics, all right? They're just like crazy.
One of them called his son Anakin.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Like, they're all. The thing I really love about them is, like, after The Force Awakens, Bally and I just listened to a bunch of shows, a bunch of people and podcasts talking about Star Wars, and everyone was, like, super, like, let's have a dig at the prequels here, let's just, like, say something negative about them. And this is the one show where you come to and, like, no, we're not gonna, like, have a space where we're negative about that stuff. We all, like, enjoy the prequels. We're not gonna, like, demean people for not enjoying them and having it be something, like, that's derogatory, which I really like. It's a space where, like, all Star Wars love is Star Wars love.
They have a great phrase on the show about, people down talking the prequels, and they say, just because you don't like the mashed potatoes doesn't mean you have to stick your finger in the mashed potatoes and ruin it for everyone else. And I thought that's such a great saying as to, like, people who, hate the prequels, and they start shouting about how terrible the prequels are, and people who like them can feel a bit like, oh, why are you hating them so much? But anyway, that's a great one. One final one I do want to mention, which is just coming back, and you reminded me of it, MBZ, just last week, and that's Invisibilia. It's similar, but better and different to This American Life, which is obviously a very famous podcast.
It's the podcast this podcast named after.
Yes. Don't tell anyone. But it's documentary style, but I forgot the name of the women who were on it.
I don't remember either.
They're
real smart.
They're really smart. They got great chemistry, great editing of that audio, really incredible.
Oh yeah, that stuff is amazing.
I mean, I'm not going to go into specifics of previous stories, but it's just really interesting. It's only like an hour long. It's just coming back this summer. I think the first episode for the second season they're on now is coming out later in June, I want to say.
Yeah. So yeah, as far as like documentary style podcasting goes, it's the best out there, I feel.
Yeah. I mean, I do love This American Life a lot, but it's very hit and miss at times. And compared to this, I think this is a far more consistently good, informative show.
Exactly.
So yeah, hopefully that's a nice rundown of the podcast. I've got so many more to talk about. If you do want to tweet at me, I can recommend.
Let's give it another 6 to 12 months.
We'll give it 6 to 12 months, and then Ben, if you want to write in again, we'll happily tackle it one more time.
Exactly.
But that is all we've got time for in terms of emails this week on the show. But I'll plug that email account one more time. That's This American Life. Look what I did. Look what I did. Look what I did. We're talking about This American Life and it goes off the rails. So yeah, that's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Please send us in more emails. That's the end of this segment. Catch us after this musical interlude for the third and final segment.
Alright everyone, welcome back to the show for our third and final segment, and No, it's the lead up to E3. Nintendo obviously not going to have a great presence there, but what they are going to do is a big chunk of Legend of Zelda for the Wii U/NX. Of course, it will be the Wii U version they're showing off, and we can only imagine what the NX one looks like. But I thought it would be interesting for Bally and I to go back and look at the last time Nintendo really showed off a brand new Zelda at E3. Now, the Skyward Sword, it was in 2010 when that happened. They had beforehand put out that artwork. Do you remember that artwork, Bally, with Link with kind of his back facing the portrait, and he's kind of like looking over his shoulder, and then behind him, he doesn't have a sword, but you see kind of the image of Fi.
And and everyone at the time, I remember thinking it was something linked to like Zora.
Yeah, there were lots of theories going around.
Loads of theories.
But yeah, so of course I feel a similar situation because we've been teased on this Zelda. We know very little about it. It's not like the minimalist amount of, tiny bit of artwork because we have had footage. But I feel like it's a very analogous situation. So Bally and I went back and watched E3 2010, which to my recollection was one of their strongest E3s, before watching this back. I remember it being the one where they announced, Donkey Kong Returns and Kirby's Epic Yarn, and a bunch of cool stuff with 3DS was happening. And I remember the Skyward Sword stuff being a bit of a clusterfuck, but oh boy, we went back and watched this. Well, things were interesting. So let's get into it then, Bally. Shall
we also mention that we both narrated over the top of this entire press conference, and everyone can find that on your channel, MBZ.
Yes, I don't know if we mentioned it at the top of the show, but if we didn't, here it is. Go to our Twitter account at TNL Podcast. There will be a link there to the commentary of us speaking over this E3 press conference, and then you can relive it with us. But I thought we'd break it down a bit more here, go a bit more in depth. Bally, how do you feel about their presentation with Skyward Sword, the trailer that preceded it, and everything that happened on stage? And do you think that there is some cause for concern, perhaps, with the new Zelda if it were to follow in the footsteps of what happened here?
I think there definitely would be concern if they tried to mirror what they did here. I think the trailer was kind of cool. It was all the different icons from different Zelda games, 3D Zelda games beforehand, sort of in a kind of interesting mix in this trailer. And then obviously they reveal Skyward Sword. They seem to just dwell on the new gameplay mechanics, which is obviously the motion control with the sword. And I don't blame them for wanting to show that off, because that is a really cool thing that obviously Skyward Sword is unique for. The downside is that it just kind of falls incredibly flat, because it became a demo showing off all these crazy weapons that all use the motion controls, and it's almost like even if it had gone smoothly and worked in terms of the motion controls, I think it still would have felt quite slow and flat. It was just really long. I'd say it was about 15 to 20 minutes long, and they're walking around this one area, like I said, using the different weapons, and it wasn't great. It just wasn't great. The crowd, you could tell, were interested, but not maybe as excited as you would hope, and maybe there should have been a more punchy trailer to launch it with. It was just weird.
Yeah, it was very much a kind of boring presentation of this game, which should be incredibly exciting because it's a brand new Zelda. I think maybe the trap that they fell into was, every time with a new Zelda game, there's always, your starting area is always some kind of foresty, wooded place. And I think from that perspective, it wasn't very aesthetically dynamic and pleasing. And as a result, you kind of disengage from that because these environments don't seem fresh or new or interesting. And the focus then gets placed on the mechanics. And the problem is, they had so many wireless problems with the Wii remote and all the stuff in the room that showing off the mechanics was a terrible affair, and it messed up more times than it worked. So as a result, you have no kind of great backdrop to entice you. You're 100% focused on the mechanics, and the mechanics are really falling flat, which makes for the focus just being taken away completely. and you just disengaging from it, I think. And like when we were talking over this, we were just not really listening to anything they were saying. We're kind of having our own conversation about the existential, nature of Zelda being shown off and everything, and how they can improve on it, all that stuff. Do you think that is a trap that could potentially happen at E3 this year? Say that their demo is always 100% focused on the outdoors. We know it's Hyrule Fields, we know it's these grassy plains, and that there's not enough kind of aesthetically pleasing or dynamic about it to get people's interest.
Yeah, I mean, I would gamble that I think that the control scheme for this new Zelda isn't going to be unbelievably different. I think in the same way that Skyward Sword was. So I'm hoping they'll spend less time talking about interesting weapons and the controls and more on the world. And so far that is how they've been selling this game the most, is about the world. And that is exciting in and of itself. But you're right, it'd be almost naive for them to just run around Hyrule Field and do something like that. It'd be cool if they teleport between a few destinations and say, this is how this works, this is how this works. Oh, there will obviously be a couple of unique mechanics you'd hope for this Zelda. We can already know that there's, the bow and, vaulting off the horse. That's one area we know that they probably will focus on. But hopefully that's part of, a wealth of different ideas that they've put in this game that they can show off, and it's not so weapons and controls focused as this demo was with Skyward Sword.
Would you then, because I feel like I would want them to maybe focus more on the openness of the world and the secret areas that you can find in the way it's designed then, as opposed to, hey, here are 6 different weapons that we've created.
Yes.
And then, I think that also the big problem with Skyward Sword as well was they showed off all these weapons, and they were all the weapons you got in every dungeon. And so by the time you got to the game itself, it wasn't really surprising. Like, you knew that the whip was going to be in there. You knew that they had this beetle item. Like, all those reveals were kind of done already, which led to the sense of, you lose that wonder that happens in Twilight Princess when you find, the ball and chain or the spinner or whatever, or this crazy new thing. Do you think, because I feel that with Link Between Worlds and the way they did it all out of order, the weapons themselves were never really that interesting or cool or fresh. And I'm worried maybe that this new Zelda will fall into that trap again, and we won't get anything as dynamic as the spinner or the ball and chain, which, underutilized as they were cool ideas.
I mean, 3D Zelda has always been reached out more when it comes to interesting weapons, and
right.
I don't see this one as being different from that. I'm confident there will be some interesting weapons that are different and new. Obviously not as many as Skyward Sword, and they will definitely be keen to demo how those work. I just think this game needs to have an engaging world and story more so than the weapons uniquely, I would say. It needs that Twilight Princess trailer to open with. I really hope they have a cinematic trailer that's well edited, great music, and it just builds that hype that you need for a Zelda game. And this 2010 showing of Skyward Sword really lacked that. And who knows what this story is going to be like and all the characters in it, but I just hope that we just get a nice taste of what's to come with this game, because obviously it's going to be a huge long story, a huge open world like they've said so many times, and there has to be an incredible trailer you can make from that.
You would hope so. I am kind of curious, how in depth is this going to be? Are we going to see dungeons? Are we going to go and see a bunch of that stuff? Because with Skyward Sword, there wasn't any look at that. And I think you can contrast that to Twilight Princess, where a bunch of their demos were based on the Goron Mines, which was a really cool area and something kind of different when they showed it off at that E3. Would you prefer the Skyward Sword route of no dungeons stuff being shown, or do you think that they should go into detail with how that stuff is built into the world?
I'm prepared for them to show as much roughly as they showed with Twilight Princess. If they want to demo as much as that demo might have spoiled Goron minds, I'm prepared to just accept that, you know, they've got to show a dungeon and what's unique about these dungeons compared to another Zelda game. I'm gonna bet that this might be the most dungeons for any Zelda ever. Who knows? We'll find out. But I'm just gonna say, like, there's more dungeons than just what they show, and just trust them and say, right, fair enough. You're gonna spoil one. You're gonna keep my excitement up until it comes out next year, but don't reveal everything. Just keep a bit back. And I do think they did that with Twilight Princess, because obviously there's so many dungeons and experiences in that game that weren't demoed that ultimately became famous parts of that game, like the spinner.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure the press will get a lot of time with it, because reports going around that Nintendo have asked them to put aside at least an hour to an hour and a half for that Zelda demo. So there's going to be some meat to it, for sure.
And I would bet that there's sort of 3 half-hour areas rather than, you know, one.
Right. So they
thing.
kind of have multiple different demos as opposed to
doing different things. One will be very much an outdoorsy exploration. One will be in a dungeon, and one will be something else. I'd gamble on that.
Yeah, I would say that gets a bit risky if people are kind of running around freely in the world and discovering things that they don't want to be seen yet.
Maybe.
Stuff like that. We'll find out. But I do think, reflecting back on 2010 and on Skyward Sword, I think that, you know, to correct some of those mistakes, you definitely want to have multiple people like discussing the game as opposed to being the person playing. I don't think like that on stage format of Miyamoto talking and playing at the same time while he tries to do it, while Bill translates. Like, I feel if you have Aonuma, Miyamoto sitting down discussing while, say, a member of the Treehouse plays at the same time, that would probably be an ideal format.
And they've definitely done that before in the last couple of E3s, I believe, where they've sort of just come and joined them on the couch and they start talking, and then, like you said, someone from the Treehouse is playing. I mean, in my opinion, I wouldn't even have someone playing it live just in case stuff happens and like mistakes are made, but they've already gone down the path of, oh, we're going to do live, it's going to be live, it's going to be a live stream, you're going to love it, blah blah blah. So they're obviously going to do that now, but it's just, I'm scared that something will go wrong. And seeing as this is the whole thing that Nintendo are doing at E3 for 2016, if there's any mistakes, it's going to be their headline and their only headline, and that's quite a scary position to be in.
Perhaps, but I don't know, they seem very confident in it. The fact that it's the only thing there, it's an extremely extended, long demo, and they're just highlighting it 100%. You have hopes, Bally, that they would, you know, actually be very confident this is a good game. And I'm pretty confident that it will, because they're good at the Zelda making, generally. So let's talk maybe a bit more about the rest of this 2010 press conference, which I thought the second half was very strong. Like, they had a lot of unveilings, a lot of game announcements that were for the core fan, that were for the person who had stuck with the Wii a long time and who kind of near the end of its life cycle were, you know, reaping some rewards. So we had stuff like Donkey Kong Country Returns, we had Kirby's Epic Yarn, we had Golden Sun Dark Dawn, we had GoldenEye Wii. A bunch of those things. That's like really feels like one of those unique years where they had like stuff for handheld, stuff for console, and, you know, even third-party stuff thrown in there with GoldenEye. I feel like, I hope in the future Nintendo can get back to stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, and once you start throwing around terms like handheld and console, we just kind of have to wait until what on earth this NX is going to be. But you're right, it covered all their bases, and even within that, you know, if you're talking 2D platformers, they've got a very cutesy, easy, simple 2D platformer with Kirby, but at the same time they got quite a difficult, challenging 2D platformer with Donkey Kong, and they really tried to appeal to different groups and accepted that, yes, if you've owned a Wii and you're still buying games, we're going to reward you, and that's a cool thing to do. But obviously the Wii's install base was pretty hefty at that point in time.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we could tell by the fact that they had Just Dance announced at that press conference, which was an exclusive game on Wii. I think it was Just Dance 2, and some other stuff which was very much in line with, hey, this touch generations, Blue Ocean market that they were appealing to, like Wii Party, which just, God, whoever wants to play Wii Party? I don't know. Maybe someone. I'd be interested in trying it one day, just as an off chance, but... weird stuff like that was definitely still happening as they attempted to keep pushing into that crowd and that group of people. I think the big thing, though, Bally, is the unveiling of the 3DS, because at that point in time, we had no idea what it looked like. And Iwata comes on stage and holds it up and very staccato-like says, "This is Nintendo 3DS," and holds the system up. And I remember... It was weird because 2010 was a time I was leaving school and I was doing a bunch of things and I was kind of a little bit disengaged from what was happening around the summer. And Nintendo's press conference was on one day. I was back from school and I realized it like halfway through. And the point in time in which I turned on this press conference was the moment right before Iwata walks out on stage with the 3DS. So I pretty clearly remember like walking into my parents' bedroom, like grabbing a laptop and watching the rest of the press conference from that point in time. And it was really, really exciting because the promise of 3D, which at that point, post 2009, post Avatar, was such a huge thing, and the promise of it without glasses was astonishing. Like, I couldn't understand how it was possible and how it could be done. And I thought, like, generally, they handled the reveal relatively well. There wasn't a lot of software to show. They had a Kid Icarus trailer. But yeah, I think as far as, like, this is our new piece of hardware, they did a decent job of it.
You know what everyone loves?
What, Bally?
Booth babes.
Booth babes. Or all
Booth
of
babes.
them.
Like, millions
I wouldn't call
of
them booth babes, though. I would call them, like, prisoners. I'd call them women attached to pieces of hardware that then become these weird accessories to the hardware and are trotted out as everyone, like, it's like they locked everyone in the room as like, no, you're not leaving. You're going to try this system that is attached to this attractive lady, and this will then influence your thoughts on the 3DS because we attached it to this attractive woman.
Do you think that when anyone bought a 3DS, like Game or GameStop or whatever, they sort of bought their 3DS and it's like, where's my lady that comes with this 3DS? What's going on?
Some more sexist parts of America, I would assume. Some people may, but let's not judge here because that's not what we are looking to do. But yeah, it was a weird ending, wasn't it? Because they're like, there's only one way for you to experience this, and it's to play the thing itself. So it did make sense from that perspective. I just think the way it was handled was maybe a little misguided.
It felt a little bit culty and religious. It was sort of like, here we are on the stage, now go and spread the word of God. And it was kind of, and this is how you will do it, and go forth. And it was, here are all our 3DSs, go and try it out. It was crazy, but I mean, hey, if it grabbed a headline and sold them some 3DSs, is it that big of a deal?
Well, who knows? But I think the interesting part of the 3DS reveal was their talk of third parties, which happens all the time. They always talk a big game and then they fall flat. But looking at that list, all these, US-based publishers, developers, and they're like, oh, we're going to have this person on board and this company, and they're going to make this game. And, it comes up with, like, THQ, who obviously don't exist anymore, with Saints Row. And it was like, the audience laughed at that. I'm not sure why that was. THQ was a laughingstock or something at that point in time.
Who knows?
But it's interesting to laugh at it now because, like, there was no Saints Row game on 3DS, they never did anything with that. I think a lot of these partnerships just fell through. You have that whole idea of movies, 3D movies, like they're like, oh yes, the Owl movie, Guardians of the fucking whatever, and Avatar, and all these other, Disney's Tangled, and we're going to have these on 3DS. And it's like, did that ever materialize? I don't think so. So it's interesting seeing a lot of these broken promises just trotted out by Iwata on stage.
Yeah, I mean, overall it was a pretty strong showing at E3, and it was refreshing to just watch, when Nintendo did E3 press conferences and actually did pretty well. And the 3DS obviously went on to get great numbers, perhaps less so Skyward Sword. But overall, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think the one thing I miss most about not having the press conference is just Reggie as the MC. I think Reggie is he's built for that stuff. He's obviously PR 101, but I think he just trots it out so well. He's a really good speaker. He's great at getting messages across. He's just a great stage presence. And I think we have missed something by not having that man on stage.
Definitely.
So, it's been fun to rewatch it. You can obviously, as we said before, look on our Twitter feed and find that there and watch along with us. Definitely some fun things to laugh about and some good stuff as well. But that is pretty much going to close out our show for this week. Next week is going to be our last show before E3, or next show, should I say, because of course every 2 weeks this comes out. So what we're shooting for, guys, is to do the show and to get it out the Friday before E3 starts. So E3 begins officially on Monday the 13th. Actually, you have Sunday with Bethesda and EA doing stuff, but Friday the 10th is hopefully when we're going to shoot to get this next episode out. So before then, we want to hear from you and we want to hear your predictions for Nintendo, specifically Zelda, because there's not really much else to predict, unfortunately. But do send in all of your Zelda predictions. Get them in before Friday the 10th, which is when it will go up. Or we'll probably maybe record a little earlier than that, but that's kind of a deadline, and we want to hear from as many people as possible what you think the new Zelda is going to be, what its subtitle will be. All of your predictions, send them to our email address. Bally, where is that?
The email address is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We want name ideas, weapon ideas, what they're going to show off, how many dungeons are they going to be? Well, maybe that's a bit early to tell, but we'll see.
What's predictions, Bally? You got to throw it out there. So yeah, we will be doing a prediction segment of our own before E3, and then you can all laugh at us as we are completely wrong after the show. But yeah, the plan going forward, that show on the 10th, and then as soon as we are able to record something about Zelda, having watched however much of it we can do before we don't want to spoil ourselves anymore, or whatever happens, we'll try and get that show out on the Monday as soon as we can.
So it will be episode 68 a little earlier than normal, and then we're going to do an E3 special post E3.
Absolutely. So yeah, look forward to that. I know there's not a lot to be excited about, but it's Zelda. Look, nothing else really matters. We're getting his new Legend of Zelda game, and we're going to see a bunch of it. So it's cause for some enjoyment.
It's only up from here.
Guys, yeah, it only goes up from here. Look, the NX hype train is rolling over. It's coming. It's before the end of the year. We'll know what NX is. All right, it's not at E3.
But
we can understand.
For now, it's the hype unicycle.
It is. Unfortunately, the hype unicycle trots along. Make sure to
hype unicycle.
Keep your balance, guys. It's hard. Unicycles are difficult. I tried one in Holland, and they are a hell of a thing.
They are. They do look hard.
They
don't quite have the same impact as a train.
No.
But, they got a bit of impact, a little bit of unicycle.
Absolutely. Well, all analogies aside, this is the show. We're going to see you next time, but before we go, let's plug ourselves. Bally, where can people find you on the internet?
Please follow me on Twitter. I am at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. That is also my name on the Miiverse. I'm in the luxurious position where I'm actually able to post from Fire Emblem Fates onto the Miiverse using my new 3DS. So definitely check out that if you want to get all my updates on what I'm playing.
Yes, unfortunately, I don't have a new 3DS, and I discovered upon going to the Miiverse, oh hey, it's one of those where my system isn't powerful enough to post screenshots, apparently. So that's why there's no Fire Emblem things on my Miiverse. But if you're on Twitter, I'm sure you got your fair share of my Fire Emblem thoughts. But yes, you can find me at Lordnbz on Twitter, and it's the same on Miiverse. You can get the show multiple places. We are on iTunes, we are on Stitcher, we will eventually be on Google Podcast things when they come to our goddamn country. We're on YouTube on Wednesdays, and with all this E3 stuff, YouTube will probably be at the same time as iTunes, just because of the timely nature of it and all that stuff. So your platform of choice is available to you. And I think that is it. I guess the email one more time, thisnintendolife@gmail.com. But Bali, anything to close before we get into this E3 cycle?
I'm just getting on my unicycle and cycling to LA. Let's do this.
All right, let's go. We'll see you guys in a couple of weeks' time. We'll be exhausted, having gone across the ocean on nothing but a unicycle.
If if Drew managed to get to Hawaii on a horse, we can get to LA on a unicycle. Absolutely,
we'll do it. It'll happen. So we'll see you next time, and thank you for listening as always. And goodbye, everyone. The musical interludes used on today's show were Pray to the Dark from Fire Emblem Fates, copyright Nintendo 2016, and a rock cover of Return to Corneria from Star Fox Zero, copyright Nintendo 2016. Hello everyone,
Claps,
and welcome. Oh fuck, I'm a tit. Alright, ready?
I thought you meant...
No. God damn it, okay.
We went
Ready,
3, 2, 1 for claps.
I'm sorry, okay. 3, I knew there was something we were 3, 2, 1...